is the methodology. I won't bore you with all of the detail that's on this slide, but just to let you know, this is based on phoning 85 contact centres. That encompass 3,000 calls, more than 3,000 calls. What we do is we have someone who plays the role of a customer who makes the call into the contact centre. So it's a warm sales lead, and you need to keep that in the back of your mind when you're actually looking at the data that we'll show you today, is that the individual or the person who plays the role of the customer for us is actually a warm sales lead. So they're not being objectionable, they're not being difficult. They're someone that is willing to be guided through the sales process and taken to the logical conclusion of that. We look across all of the major industries, or what we would call retail industries in the country, and it's important to note that the person who makes the call is not the person who actually analyses the call. So we separate those two functions, and that allows our full-time analysts who are calibrated and trying to ensure that they're assessing the complexity of a needs-based selling. So it's different in that point from traditional mystery shopping. The other thing that I wanted to point out that's changed this year is that we have changed the benchmark, and the reason that we've changed the benchmark is to put a greater emphasis on the interpersonal skills and to provide greater granularity with regards to the needs discovery process. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we've done that and why we think that's so critical towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so what we've got here is the results, and the first thing to note here is to say congratulations to everyone that's made it to the top 10. So out of the 85 contact centres that we assess, these are the people that made it to the best of the best in the top 10. Compare the Market came in at number 1, second was ING Direct, and then what we've done is we've grouped the following 3 companies together into what we're calling rounds out the top 5, because the scores with regard to Australian Unity, HCF and iSelect Health Insurance were that close that we didn't feel that it was fair to actually separate them. And then what there was, when we looked at the data, there was a logical another tier, which was ANZ, Budget Direct, Bupa, NIB and NRMA, which all were grouped around a similar score, and they round out the top 10. So once again, well done to the health insurance industry. Last year you were well overrepresented in the top 10, and you'll see again the health insurance industry has taken out the best industry by being represented with 6 out of the top 10. Interestingly, with the health insurance industry, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is that the aggregators for the health insurance industry are actually making it into the top 10 as well. So for many industries, when aggregators have come into an industry, they've led a race to the bottom on both service and price. But in the health insurance industry in Australia, it's remarkable that I guess the introduction of the aggregators appears to be leading and driving the industry to have even better quality sales conversations with its customers. The other thing I'll point out here is congratulations to ANZ Superannuation. It's the first time we've had a superannuation focused contact centre in the top 10. And the other call out I would make is for ING Direct, because they're the only mortgage provider that has made it into the top 10. And that's no mean feat given the complexity of the mortgage application process, which needs to focus on a lot of detail and tends to take consultants away from the more humanistic elements of an actual call. The next thing we did was to have a look at, well, where are these contact centres based that are making up the top 10? The first point to note here is that all of these contact centres are onshore, so no offshore contact centres that we found actually made it into the top 10. And I guess it reflects the fact that most organisations are attempting to keep sales conversations, those high-value sales conversations, onshore, even though we know that there's a higher cost of acquisition in that point. The other thing to note here is the number of contact centres in the top 10 that are regionally based. So you'll see there the white ones are regionally based contact centres, and there's 4 out of the top 10. Now, the other point that I'd make here is that whilst Brisbane is definitely a metro area, to some degree we could also put them in with the the regional contact centres, given the more laid back approach you feel from contact centres, particularly when they tend to be in regional areas. So if you do add Brisbane into the regional context here, then you could say that regional contact centres are actually making up 5 out of the top 10 contact centres. So while we haven't drilled down on that specifically, one of the things that we're really noticing is that what makes a really good experience is when the consultants are actually, particularly, demonstrating to a customer that they've got plenty of time to actually listen and to spend time solving the customer's issues. And that seems to be more apparent in regional centres. Okay, the next slide that we've got here starts to show us some of the things that are differentiating the top 10 from everyone else. So you'll see here that the overall average score for the top 10 is 55%, and when we take the average of everyone else, we see that the score is around the 42%. Now, whilst there are some contact centres in the top 10 that do some things well and other things not so well, and the same for the contact centres that are in the everyone else, the 75 other contact centres, what we've got here is an overall summary of what the top 10 tend to do better than the other contact centres. So the top 10 are more likely to be structured, and by that what we mean is that when they come into a conversation, it appears that they know and have done before and have demonstrated before a way of actually helping the customer. So early on in conversations, they will set up a structure that lets the customer know that I've heard why you've rung in, but what I'm going to do now is just talk to you about what needs to be done to solve your problem, as opposed to many contact centres that are poorer performing in our benchmark, where there seems to be no structure to the call and everything is driven largely by the customer and what they're trying to achieve. So it feels like the customer has to really be asking the right questions and driving the conversation in order to get their particular issue resolved. The top 10 are much more likely to be proactive, and by that we mean they're looking for opportunities to provide even more to the customer than what the customer might have realised they could have got from this particular conversation. So they're things like looking for opportunities to add even more value to the customer through either adding additional products and services, but also helping the customer understand what needs to be done for them to actually fulfil the product that they're looking for. The top 10 are more likely to be conversational. That is where it feels like the sales conversation is two-way and that the consultant's actually listening to what's been said, and then the next part of what they're saying is based on them picking up and listening to what's been said by the customer. On the other side, it's a very reactive, process-driven approach where it feels like the customer's emotional and needs for the particular product are really secondary to, we need to get all of the information we need to work out what sort of product is the right one for you. So we know that we do need to get information in order to sell a customer the right product, but we need to do it in a way that feels more conversational and more driven by the actual customer. And the last one here is people-driven versus process-driven, which I've already covered to some degree. Just that feeling that the customer's needs and the customer's wants are foremost in the process, as opposed to the process being all about capturing information so that some algorithm can make a decision about the best product for the customer. Okay, the slide we've got here now starts to give you an indication of how the individual industries that we benchmarked have performed. And as I've spoken already, and it'll be no surprise from the contact centres and the brands who are in the top 10, that the health insurance industry is the best performing industry that we benchmark. And I've already spoken about well, some of the reasons that that might be, but you know, the aggregators certainly seem to be driving the industry to a better place with regard to sales conversations. But when I get asked about why the health insurance performs so well, one of the reasons that when we dig into it, it appears that consultants naturally seem to be able to relate to health issues more than perhaps some other products that consultants might be selling. So if we've got a contact centre that's full of, you know, the majority are young people, young consultants, for them to talk about and understand home loans and superannuation is often a difficult thing for them. But everyone knows about their health or the health of their family, and that appears to make it easier for consultants to engage with people on a more humanistic level about around the benefits of the product. That's one thing, but on the other hand, from the clients that we work with in the health insurance industry, we know that they absolutely value the level and that their consultants engage with their people. So it's also a great pat on the back to that industry for the amount of work that they've done in this particular area. A couple other things I'll call out on this slide is transactional savings, which is on the bottom row there. The score and the performance in transactional savings is quite low, and this appears to be a real missed opportunity in the banking industry, particularly when you might think, well, a transactional saving account, it's not necessarily a high value product, but when most banks are now considering the measure of main bank customer and having that transactional account where my pay goes in and it's my main transactional account is an absolute indicator of a main bank customer, and it also is an indicator of how sticky that customer is going to be over time. So we see that there's an opportunity for banks to put more of a focus on providing a much better sales conversation together for transactional savings and savings account sales inquiries. A couple of other points is energy retailers, they're by no means the highest performers, but from a couple of years ago, they were the worst performers in our benchmark. So we know that there's a massive amount of work being done by the energy retailers to improve the quality of the conversations. They now understand that they are in a competitive market and that the sales and service experience they provide will have a major impact on their success as a business. So it's been quite a remarkable rise over the last couple of years for the energy retailers. Okay, let's now have a look at what differentiates the top 10 from the other 75 companies, but also we will be looking at here some of the opportunities that the top 10 still have for them to improve the quality of their sales and service conversations. What we've done here on this slide is we separate the behavioural benchmark. So right at the very basis of our research is a whole series of behavioural criteria. And when our analysts are listening to these calls, they're assessing whether these behaviours were demonstrated or not. So that's the very basis of the benchmark. What we can do, though, is we can group those behavioural benchmarks into a couple of key categories. One being engagement, and this is more the humanistic element of the call. How do we relate to the customer? While the acquisition grouping is all of the elements that are more around a structured sales conversation. And it's quite interesting to look at this because what you'll see here is while the top 10 are outperforming all of the other contact centres in both categories, you'll see here that the acquisition category is where the major difference is. So what we're seeing is that the top 10 is quite a bit better at structuring a sales conversation than what the rest of the contact centres are. And having said that, though, you'll see here that particularly on acquisition is that the top 10 are still only scoring around 47%. And what that shows us is that there's a massive opportunity for everyone in the industry to do a much better job of those structured sales elements that form actually drive conversion, but also drive customer advocacy as well. Okay, this is where we start to drill into the really nitty-gritty of what makes up the benchmark, and where we can really start to see, well, what's differentiating the top 10, but where are they also not necessarily performing well. What we've done here is we've pulled together the behavioural criteria that logically sit at the start of a sales conversation, and we call these, we tend to group these into an area called engaging the customer. So these are the behaviours that you'd expect to see at the start of a call to let obviously acknowledge the customer's name and know them just to the level of knowing their name. The second is do we actually offer assistance? Are we helpful? When the first thing they hear from us is it that they're hearing from us that we want to help them. Then we look at, well, how do you respond to the initial inquiry? Do we try to restate it, and do we summarise to make sure that there's an agreement or an understanding between us and the customer? We then move into a strong statement of assistance. That's where we'd be telling the customer, absolutely, we can help you with that today. We're looking for you to be using the customer's name. And we're also looking for the ability to engage with the customer around their initial need. Virtually always we find when a customer calls in, there'll be some sort of emotion being displayed that is sitting behind the reason that they called. It could be excitement because they're looking for a home loan for a new home that they would like to buy, or it could be frustration that they haven't been getting the service that they'd be looking for and thus are wanting to talk to someone else. So we're looking for consultants to engage with that, to acknowledge that emotion and respond to the customer appropriately. And then the last three elements are all about setting up the structure for the actual conversation, which really says to a customer, this person knows what they need to do to solve my problem. I'm in really good hands. So what you'll see here is that there are elements around strong statement of assistance and using the customer's name, which are setting the top 10 apart, and definitely the structure that they're providing at the start of the call around introducing questioning and what needs to be done to solve the customer's inquiry is definitely a point that's setting them apart. However, you'll absolutely see that on key elements like seek to engage, we're seeing no difference between the top 10 and all the rest of the contact centres. So this is where I'd really like to bring Lauren into the conversation, because the reason that we wanted ING to be part of this webinar is the fact that not only are they number 2 and performing very, very well, particularly when they're selling a mortgage product, which is very easy to become very detailed and information focused. They're actually doing well on the two criteria that you'll see highlighted there, which is seek to engage and the ability to structure by introducing questioning and providing context. So Lauren, could I get you to come into the conversation now, and please remember you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you would like by going to the right hand side of your screen and typing in those questions. But Lauren, I'd like you to just talk to us a little, particularly around seek to engage and introducing questioning, just to talk us through why you decided that that was an area of focus that you would like to work on, a little bit about what you did to help solve that problem, and then what are the results that you're seeing as a result of lifting those particular behaviours.
Yeah, no worries, Peter. So the first thing for us around introducing questioning is really important. We kind of get this up front straight away at the start of the call to give the customer a really clear expectation of what they can expect from us. So we have customers calling for all different reasons, whether it be refinancing or purchasing new properties or investment properties. So we really want them to have a good idea of what to expect out of that call. It helps to set up what we are going to ask them. Initially, our customers think that they're probably just calling for their borrowing power, but we do like to get into the emotional side of things straight away with them. We live by the mantra ING Direct that most people buy with their emotions and they justify later through their logic. So we really want to get to the crux of what's driving their inquiry straight away. So if that's a refinance, people might originally think that, hey, I'm looking to save money, but we like to delve a bit deeper and really find out, well, what are you saving that money for and what's it going to mean for you longer term? We've found that this has definitely helped lift our conversion results overall. Um, in terms of how we embed these behaviours in our staff, so that's all done through a structured quality assurance program, which rewards them for displaying these behaviours that we like to see.
Excellent. And how have you found consultants responding to this, Lauren?
Well, I was one of them myself when I first joined the direct mortgages team. And I have to say that when I first came in and kind of learnt the ING direct way of doing things, I was a little bit shocked because it wasn't what I was expecting. As you mentioned before, I think when you're thinking about home loans, you're often thinking that it's very detailed and very process driven, and that people would all be about the numbers. But what we've definitely found is engaging with our customers on that emotional level has helped drive our conversion results. And oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I think more than anything, the consultants really enjoy that they can connect with their customers more on an emotional level rather than just talking about the numbers. And definitely our guys are heavily engaged and enjoy the sales process. So it's not just for the customer. I think our guys get a lot out of it by having human conversations with people.
Yeah, and Lauren, that's one of the reasons I asked that question, because we absolutely see in the better performing contact centres that are able to engage with the customer, we actually see a rise in the engagement of the consultants. So instead of consultants turning up to work and rattling through processes all day, which are, sometimes boring the hell out of them, we actually see people who are really engaged in having conversations, and they generally want to get to know their customers. But the result is obviously a happier customer, a better solution, but we also find that it's an intrinsic reward process for the consultants themselves. So thank you very much for that, Lauren. I'll, as we go through the next couple of slides, I'll keep asking you to come back and help us understand what you've done to really drive great results. So the next slide that we're looking at here is we're now, we've engaged the customer, we've understood why they've called in at an initial level, we've set up a structure for the call. We now move into that uncovering their needs or the discovery phase. Now, one of the things that I see really is highlighted on this slide is that there is a massive opportunity across all contact centres to improve the quality of the discovery process. You'll see here that the top 10 are really not outperforming the rest of the contact centres by that much, and the only point that you could really call out where the top 10 are significantly outperforming is in the area of open questions to uncover which features. In our benchmark, one of the most highly ranked or areas of the whole benchmark is the questioning phase. And the reason that we do that is that we weight the elements of the questioning phase more heavily is because we know that it's a significant driver of the ability to convert. We must understand the customer if we're actually going to be able to present the right solution. If we're going to build enough trust with a customer that they would take our recommendation, then we must be able to demonstrate that we've understood their situation in the first place. Now, once again, you'll see highlighted on this slide, there's two areas here where ING perform very, very well, and that is questions to drill down into the why, but they're also very good at empathising and enthusing about the situation of need. So what we'd be looking for there is if someone starts telling us the emotional reasons that they're looking for a particular product, then we'd expect that there be some confirmation and acknowledgement of those particular feelings from the customer. So Lauren, once again, could you just talk to us a little bit about what you've done that has led to better questioning at your end, but also more enthusiasm from your consultants with regard to the customer's situation?
So I guess that's kind of threefold, Peter. I mean, at the very crux of it, it all starts with the people that we hire. So in the direct mortgages space, above all else, we really look to hire to make sure that people are a cultural fit within our organisation and share similar values to us. So I can teach them the hard skills, but ensuring that they have that enthusiasm and that passion and drive is absolutely number one priority when we're hiring our people. So I think that comes across in our call ratings there. We also spend a significant amount of classroom training and also coaching and follow-up around questioning. So we spent the past few months on questioning as our theme, really teaching the guys that when they are questioning, they're trying to question to find out how the customer is looking to benefit from their account. So I think we often focus on features, but what we really want to understand is how is the customer going to use the account, and how's it going to benefit them in their greater picture. So I think home loans is something you often set and forget about, but we really want customers to be active and engaged in their product. So we really want to find out bigger picture how it's going to fit into their life and their lifestyle. To make sure that that all comes together, we then have a structured quality assurance program, as I mentioned before, that heavily rewards our agents for using the behaviours that we want to see. So when we're training, we're not training them on a script or giving them things to say. We're teaching them the tools and I guess the sales psychology that helps drive customer decisions. It's up to them to put that in place, and then when they do that, we reward them for it.
Yeah, fantastic. And if you had any, like we usually see that in contact centres, it's very easy to have a call quality system that leaves no room to move, so it's all black and white and anyone can assess it. But we know that that leads to very robotic conversations. So, how have you gone with your leaders and I guess developed their ability to assess more based on intent? And as you said, sort of the psychology that's behind rather than the actual words that were said. How have you managed to get that to happen?
So I think that comes down to how we've designed our quality assurance program. So we revamped it at the end of last year, and rather than it being about the leaders, it was about the guys on the floor. So we sat down and said, what works for you and what do you want to be rewarded for doing, what drives those conversion behaviours, and what's not working in our guide at the moment, which was some of those things that had been kind of scripted in the past and were quite robotic. So we actually allowed the guys to develop the sales guide and quality assurance structure that was going to work for them. And through that process, they identified that there were behaviours that they would do that would lead to conversion. So rather than marking on certain words or anything, or being so strict on scripts, it's more about demonstrating a behaviour. How they do that is up to them, but our quality assurance analysts look for the behaviour that they're demonstrating, and then we coach around that.
Fantastic. That's it's a great lesson in how we try and drive a more humanistic conversation with the customer. So thank you. Let's now we'll move on to the next slide, which is where we've pulled together the criteria that I guess make up the back end of a call. So this is where we're looking to present a solution to the customer after we've understood them, well, ideally we are, and asking those questions which are really looking to seek a commitment from the customer. You'll see here that once again it's only a couple of areas. The top 10 are more likely to recommend a specific solution, and by that we mean one solution which is targeted at our understanding of the customer, not a whole array of solutions on the table. The top 10 perform better with the ability to check for understanding, but you'll see that it only happens in less than 40% of cases. One thing I should explain is that the data that you're seeing on these slides actually tells you the percentage of time that these behaviours were demonstrated during our research. So for check understanding, you'll see that probably around 14% of the time this behaviour is demonstrated by everyone else, and then if you move up to the top 10, they're doing it around 35% of the time. But what it tells us is that 35% of times is still way below what you might expect if we were really seeking to be best practice. You'll see that I think the next point, explain features, actually tells us something about the mindset that we have in contact centres and what our role is. Virtually all of the consultants are able to explain the features of the product, and in most cases they do that to the detriment of the actual sales conversation, because they haven't understood what the customer wants, so therefore they end up having to present multiple solutions and they explain the features of them all, hoping that somewhere along the line something might tweak with the customer and they might see value in the product. We know that that's a very inefficient and non-customer focused way to try and attempt to get a sale. Um, but it's the next section that is really interesting around generic and personalised benefits. So, you know, needs-based selling has been around for at least 35 years. It started in the United States primarily with a company called Xerox that obviously is still around today. And the basic premise of it was that the way that we're going to achieve a sale is that we're going to understand the customer at a great depth, and then once we have that understanding, we're then going to make a strong recommendation, but we're also going to clearly articulate to the customer how the features of our product actually help that person on an individual level and a personal level. What is it about our product that's actually going to help the customer achieve their particular goals for this particular product? And that's where there's a massive opportunity for everyone in this industry. Out of the more than 3,000 calls that we made, we saw that particular behaviour demonstrated on less than 5% of calls. So when we make a sales call, if you're a customer in this country and you ring up a contact centre, you should expect that virtually never will someone make the direct link between how your product how the product works and what you've said you actually need at a very emotional level for the product. So that's something that is a massive opportunity for all of the contact centres. Then we move on to the agreement question. This is about starting to test the waters with the customer and really understanding as to whether they're on the same page with us with regard to the value, and then it moves on to attempt the sales close. Now, while we see a big spike up in the attempt the sales close, I need to point out to you that we need to think about this data in the context of a warm sales lead. So we instruct the people who are making the calls to be warm and friendly and agreeable, almost regardless of how well the conversation's proceeded up to this point. We'd expect that once there's been some conversation about the solution, we actually ask our consultants or the people, our customers who are making the calls to be agreeable and to be sort of saying things like, oh, that sounds okay. And when you look at these numbers, so based on that scenario, you'll see that in the contact centres that fall outside the top 10, it's only 60% of the time that we get asked whether we would like to go ahead with the sale. And that's when the customer's sitting there being agreeable and really making indications that they're ready to proceed. So we still see in sales contact centres there is a major aversion to asking for the sale. And we can only imagine, we don't have the data, but we can only imagine in real life when you have a mixed bag of customers, many of them that are more difficult than the customers that we have on the end of the phone, how low that attempt to sales close must be. So, Lauren, once again, back to you, just to ask you the questions about you outperform the industry and the top 10 in things like personalised benefits and agreement questions. So what is it that you've done that is helping you to nail those particular behaviours, and what sort of results are you getting from it?
So I think with our teams in particular, especially for a product like a home loan that is so technical and detail focused, it was kind of about taking away that from the guys and stripping back the features of the product to focus on actually how the products can benefit the customer. So I think we have this natural instinct when we have a lot of knowledge about something to tell someone everything that they think that they need to know. However, what we get our guys to do is focus on really only 2 or 3 key benefits that suit the customer's broader situation that are going to help them achieve their goals. So we get them to present just one solution to the customer. So we have a range of products, but we focus on just one tailored solution that meets the 2 or 3 key needs that that customer had. So training the guys to do that was kind of challenging because it goes against our natural instincts in some regards, but we've seen great success out of that. Especially in the home loan space, having just one great solution for the customer takes away some of that uncertainty. I find when we're giving a lot of options or a lot of features of an account, that can kind of have the opposite effect on conversion, because all of a sudden as a customer I'm unsure. Whereas if we focus on just 1 or 2 key items, it really helps drive that commitment to say yes from the customer.
Yeah, and I guess you can have the confidence to do that based on the quality of your questioning and the understanding of the customer that comes before this point. Would that be correct?
Exactly right. So focusing on that open questioning and finding out how the customer plans to use the account and what greater overall benefits they want to get out of it sets us up for success later on in the call.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lauren. There's a couple of questions that have come through that I'll just answer now. There was a question here about when was the survey and the data actually collected. So the data in this particular research was captured from January to April 2000. So it's certainly recent data. And then there was another question from Scarborough Advice, was it? Maz, yeah? Maz, where you're talking about some of the restrictions that, particularly in, say, superannuation or in the finance industry, you have with regard to personal and general advice. And I absolutely agree with the question that when you have regulations around the amount of personal advice that you can provide, it actually can become this questioning, and particularly the solution phase can become very, very difficult for you to navigate in a way that we would see as truly customer focused, because you're not in a position to provide advice that really links, this is what our product does and this is how it's going to help your personal situation. So if in that sense we would have to, from a benchmarking point of view, that is not a particular behaviour that you would be able to demonstrate to any degree. However, what I would say is that if you look back earlier in this particular benchmark and you look at the categories, there are many of them which you can do, which will lead to a much greater outcome from the customer. And I'm thinking here of even just simple things at the start of the conversations. You know, how many times do we hear that we call into a contact centre and we'll be asking for a particular product or service, and there is, you know, and we actually ask our people who are playing our customers to be actively displaying some sort of emotion when they're starting off with the call and explaining the reason that they've phoned in. And you'd be surprised at how many times that particular information is totally ignored, and the consultant is so keen to get on with the process elements of the call that a very emotive statement will be followed up with, oh, could I just have some details from you, or something that just totally ignores the situation we're in. So I would say to you, when you do have those restrictions around general and personal advice, is that yes, you do need to take the focus off certain elements of the benchmarking that we've got in front of you here. But that doesn't mean that there's not many, many other elements of the conversation that you could improve to deliver a much more humanistic and engaging conversation with the customer, and they will definitely lift your conversion even if you can't get right to that point where you're doing personalised benefits. And we're going to talk about why that's so right now. So thank you for the question, and please keep firing any other questions that you have through. Okay, now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we see as the biggest trend that is impacting sales conversion and how we see ourselves as salespeople, and that's what we call people versus process. If we look back 20 or 30 years, sales used to be largely about who had information and who didn't have information. If I was a salesperson and I had lots of information and I came to see a customer and they didn't have information, then that imbalance was almost enough to get me over the line and for me to be able to sell my products. However, there's a little thing called the internet and the World Wide Web that has dramatically turned that on its head. Information is available everywhere. Everyone has access to information, and many times the people that we're actually selling to may have accessed and done more research than we have, and may know more about some of our products than what we do. That's actually starting to tip the power balance in the sales conversation, where we know that customers now feel like they have a lot more power to question and challenge in the conversation process. And we're also seeing the increasing importance of the people aspect, or the humanistic element of the conversation, becoming more and more important and even more correlated to sales outcomes as opposed to being a subject matter expert. And we'll just take you through a little bit more on that. So this is just a little poll that I would like you to do at your end to demonstrate what we're talking about. And all we're really asking you to do here is just assess which consultant would you rather buy from. We've got one there on the left-hand side is Alex, and it says the sorts of things that Alex would do if you were a customer and you were talking to Alex. And on the right-hand side, we've got Sam, so you can read through. I'd get you to just read through those two. If you're in a group, you might want to have a quick chat, but then use the polls on your screen to tell us which one you would prefer to deal with. Okay, so you guessed it, and no surprises that you've all picked Alex, and that's really, you know, immediately with just a couple of little statements on a screen, you're able to very quickly pick who you would rather purchase products for, and that's the underlying, I guess, thinking behind what you'll see on the next slide. Now, we don't necessarily have exact data for us to be able to demonstrate this at the moment, but it's certainly when we're talking to people, when we're reading the research and we're looking at the particular behaviours that are driving conversion, what we're seeing is that over time the importance of being a subject matter expert is actually decreasing. It doesn't mean, well, by this we're not saying that you don't need to know how to find stuff and how to find information in order for you to be able to relate that to the customer. But what we are finding is that the complexity of sales roles now is so great that you can't possibly expect one person to know the detail about every single product that they might be responsible for selling. So what we know now is we need great knowledge management systems and the ability to know how to use them so that people can quickly access information. But what we're seeing is a dramatic rise in the need for what we would call the EQ side of things, so the emotional intelligence, the behaviours that show that you can form relationships and rapport with customers quite quickly. So that's the general trend that we're looking at now. I'll also show you some data now, which is based on some actual benchmarking. So this is some research that we did for an insurance company. And what you'll see on this slide is that what we did was we said we took a whole lot of unsuccessful calls, sales calls, and we took a whole lot of successful sales calls. These were actual recorded calls that were provided to us by the client. And what we set out to do was to say, when we benchmark these calls, which are the behaviours that correlate most closely with sales conversion? And this was in response to the client who they had just put a new product into market and they were finding it very difficult to sell that particular product, but they knew that some of their consultants were able to sell it better than others. So they asked us to do this research. And what we came down to is that there was three behaviours that were more closely correlated to a successful sales outcome than anything else. One was the acknowledgement of the emotion or the mood of the particular customer. So when a customer displays a particular emotion of annoyance or elation or concern, that is actually picked up by the consultant, and the consultant does something or says something that actually says to the customer, they absolutely understand my mood. We also looked at proactively engage. So that's the ability to proactively have a conversation with the customers. Customers are always dropping little hints and tidbits about what's happening in their lives. There might be even background noise, things that are going on. But the consultants who were able to pick up on that and engage in a short conversation around that, absolutely that showed that it correlated to sales outcomes and conversion. And then the last one was that real ability to empathise and enthuse with the actual situation and the needs of the customer. So when the customer is actually explaining to us why they particularly need a solution, and they might be talking about family or kids or their lifestyle, that we're able to relate to that and enthuse and empathise whatever's appropriate. So what you'll see on the actual data that it shows here is you'll see that on the successful sales outcome, we saw at least one of those behaviours demonstrated around 72% of the time, and on unsuccessful sales outcomes it was only 42. But it gets really interesting as you go across. We saw two of those behaviours, successful outcomes, sales outcomes, around 47, 48% of the time, and then it drops down to only 18% of the time, 19% of the time for unsuccessful sales outcomes. And then finally, we were looked at how many of those calls were all three of those behaviours demonstrated, and you'll see that 17.4% of the time all three were demonstrated on the successful calls and only 5.8% on the unsuccessful. So this is some research that we're going to be doing more and more of, and helping customers to really understand how these more, I guess, often seen as intangible elements of a phone call, but definitely the more humanistic, the more relationship-based behaviours are actually driving conversion, and how that's changing over time. I thought it'd be interesting now to look at, now that we've established that those particular behaviours are very important in driving conversion, now we're dropping back to having a look at, well, when we actually did the research, how often did we see those behaviours? And it's very interesting with regard to proactively engage. You'll see that there's very little difference between what the top performers are doing and everyone else. You'll see that around acknowledging the emotion and the mood, that the top 10 are significantly better than everyone else, but we're still only seeing that done in less than 50% of occasions, even with the top performing contact centres. And then finally, you'll see the criteria about enthusing, empathising and enthusing. And while the top 10 is better, you'll see that it's still only happening on around about a quarter of all of the conversations. So what this does is it really tells us that it doesn't matter whether you're a top performer or one of the other contact centres. If you want to remain relevant, if you want to be, I guess, on trend with regard to the behaviours that we're seeing that are driving conversion and great customer advocacy, then there's a lot of work to be done across all of the contact centres, not only with the contact centres that we put into the everyone else category. Finally, thank you very much for your time. We've taken up almost an hour. I hope that what we've taken you through has been informative and insightful for you. I do want to especially thank Lauren for coming along today and really giving us the perspective from a contact centre that has been able to make some really great strides with regard to delivering a really humanistic, engaging and professional sales conversation to the customers. So Lauren, thank you very much for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
No problems. Now, what I'll do is, just to finish up, is we are happy to talk about more specifically. We do not, other than identifying the top 10, we do not release publicly anyone else's scores or data. We are more than happy to talk to anyone about their results. We are happy to come and meet you. We'd be happy to jump in on a team meeting that you might be having, say, with your team leaders or as a leadership team in your business, and explain in a little more detail your specific results and how you performed against the benchmark. So please get in touch. If you've got any more questions that you'd like us to answer, please send them through. My email address there is on the bottom of the slide pack that you'll have access to, and we'll certainly get that out to you as well. But thank you very, very much for attending this webinar. Once again, I hope it's been helpful for you, and I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future about how we can keep aiming and keep striving to deliver fantastic sales conversations for our customers. Thank you very much.